Okay, today's lesson is on the study guide for Unit 5, Section 2, okay, which is factoring. All right, now for number 1, the directions ask us to factor 6x to the 4th plus 24x to the 3rd, okay? Now the key to finding the greatest common factor is you look for the largest number that divides into each coefficient. So the largest number that divides into 6 and 24 is 6. So that is our first number for our greatest common factor, 6, okay? Now, next, you need to find the greatest common factor of the variables, okay? We're looking for a term that will divide into both terms. So every variable and every number that I write has to be able to divide into this term and this term. So to find the greatest common factor of variables, you're going to pick the variable with the smallest exponent every time, okay? So the variable with the smallest exponent is x to the 3rd, so our greatest common factor is 6x to the 3rd power. This term divides into both of these terms. Okay? So that is our final answer for the greatest common factor for number 1. Okay? Number 2, again, we find the greatest common factor of the coefficients. The largest number that divides into 7 and 21 is 7. Okay? Now, the largest variable that divides into x to the 4th and x to the 3rd is going to be the variable between these two that has the smallest exponent. H to the 3rd is the smallest exponent, so our greatest common factor is 7h to the 3rd power. Number 3, we need to factor these 3 terms, okay? So we still find the greatest common factor, and then we're going to divide it. We're going to factor it out. We're going to take the greatest common factor out of all 3 of these terms. So the largest number that goes into 3, 9, and negative 6 is 3. The greatest common factor of the letters is the smallest letter that's in every term. Is there an x in every one of these? Yes. What's the smallest x you see? X squared. Is there a y in every term? Yes. What's the smallest y that you see? Y. Okay? So this is our greatest common factor, 3x squared y. Now what we do is we find out.
Miss Wood, if you're still in the building, can you please come see Miss Donahue? Thank you.
Now what we must do is find out what do we multiply this by to get this. To do that, we divide. 3 goes into 3 one time, x squared goes into x squared one time, y goes into y one time, so all that's 1. Okay? 3x squared y times 1 is 3x squared y, x squared y. Now, what times 3 equals 9? 3. What times x squared equals, excuse me, what times x squared equals x to the 3rd? X. What times y equals y squared? Y. What times 3 equals negative 6? Negative 2. What times x squared equals x squared? 1. What times y equals y to the 3rd? Y squared. Okay? What I just did is I divided this into this, got 1, divided this into this, got this, and divided the greatest common factor into this and got this. Now, if you want to check it, you multiply this times all 3 of these. And if you get your original problem, that means you did it right. So 3x squared y times 1 plus 3xy minus 2y squared is our final answer for number 3. We have factored number 3. We have broken this up into as many pieces as we can. So again, greatest common factor of the numbers is 4. The greatest common factor of the letters is the smallest letter you see there, x. And then you divide. 4 into 4 is 1. X goes into x to the 3rd, x squared times. 4 goes into negative 8, negative 2. X goes into x squared, x times. 4 goes into 12 3 times. And x divided into x is 1. And you don't have to write it because 3 times 1 is 3. So this is our final answer. Okay? This is the greatest common factor, and this is another factor. Now sometimes they will ask you to find factors of this. these two things are factors. Factors are two numbers or two expressions that you can multiply by each other to get what they gave you. If you multiply these by each other, you get this. So both of these are factors of this original problem. Pull out the greatest common factor. The largest number that goes into 16, 32, and 8 is 8. And then I divided 8 into all of these. Now I did not pull a letter out right here because each one of these does not have a letter in it. These two do, but this one does. So it's not a common factor. If it's a common factor, that means all three of them have that in common. That's just like 3 kids and all 3 kids like the same kind of music, you have that in common. If 2 of the 3 kids like rap and 1 of the kids likes country, then you do not have liking rap music in common. Okay? So each one of these terms has to have a C for you to pull it out. If they don't, so you don't pull out the C. 8 goes into 16 2 times, C to the third. 8 goes into negative 32, negative 4, C squared, and then 8 goes in 8 one time with a negative. Greatest common factor of the coefficients, there are ones understood to be here, so you're going to pull out a 1. And the greatest common factor of the letters is q to the 4. So our greatest common factor is 1q to the 4. Once we pull out our q to the 4th, all we do is go divide. Q to the 4th goes into q to the 6th, q squared times. Q to the 4th goes into q to the 4th one time. So our factored answer is q to the 4th times q squared plus 1. Q to the 4th times q squared is q to the 6th. Q to the 4th times 1 is q to the 4th. I multiplied my two factors and got my original problem. That means my answer is correct. Now, for this one, all we have to do is find the GCF for number 7. Okay? All we have to do is find the GCF. So, we find the largest number that goes into 20, 40, and 60. It's going to be 20. So, we pulled it out. Okay? The smallest letter that you see that's in each one is W. The smallest Z that you see in each one is Z. So this is our greatest common factor. Okay? This is the GCF. Now, if the directions tell you the factor, you also got to find out what's in parentheses. You got to find out what do I multiply my greatest common factor by to get my original problem. That would be this. Okay? But this problem, they just ask for the GCF. But this one we need the factor. So we pull out the GCF. 3 goes in, that's the biggest number that goes into both 9 and 27 is 3. And the smallest x that you see in both of them is x to the 4th. So my greatest common factor is 9x to the 4th. And then I divide. This goes into this one time. This goes into this 3x squared times. And again, if you want to check your problem, multiply the outside times the inside. If you get the original problem,
Miss Gunn, please dial the main office. Miss Gunn, please dial the main office.
now this one looks complicated. It's the same thing. Pull out the greatest common factor of the coefficients, which is 1. No, I'm sorry, I apologize. This is solving by group because we've got 4 of them. Okay? When we have 4 terms, we're going to group things that have stuff in common. So our notes tells us to group the first 2 together and to group the second 2 together. So that's what we did here. Okay? Now you pull out a common factor. Both of these have 4's in them, so you pull out a 4. Okay? And then on the inside, you're going to have x plus y, because 4 times x is 4x, 4 times y is 4y. For this one, both of these have b's in common, so we pull it out. B times x is bx, b times y is by. So when we're solving by grouping, you only do this when you're trying to factor a 4-termed expression. You notice we have the same thing inside the parentheses, okay? Once we see the same things inside the parentheses, we know our answer is going to be the outside numbers put together, so that's 4, and a positive b, and then one of the inside terms, x plus y. If you multiply this, you get this. That means your answer is correct. So when you see 4 terms, we solve by grouping. We solve this one by grouping. Put the first two together, put the second two, pulled out the common factor. We have the same thing in parentheses, so my answer is x plus 6 times x plus 2. If you want to check it, multiply it, you get what you had in the beginning. This answer is correct. Okay, solve by grouping. Pull out common factors. So my final answer is going to be the outside, x minus 2 times x plus 7. Now for these, this is where we did the big X. In other words, you find two numbers that multiply to equal 14 and add to equal 9. 7 times 2 is 14. 7 plus 2 is 9. So my answers are t plus 7 times t plus 2. Okay? The first numbers in the parentheses are going to be the two letters that multiply to equal this. And then the last two numbers will be two numbers that multiply to equal 14 and add to equal 9. So for this one, we're looking for two numbers that multiply to equal negative 10 and add to equal negative 3. Those numbers are negative 5 and positive 2. Negative 5 times 2 is negative 10. If you owe somebody $5 and you pay them 2, you still owe 3. Negative 12 times negative 1 equals positive 12. You owe somebody $12 and you owe somebody $1, you owe 13. So my two numbers that are going to be inside the parentheses are negative 12.
Miss Jackson, please dial the main office. Miss Jackson, please go to a workroom and call me from there and call the main office, please.
Okay. W is going to be our first letters in the parentheses. And we're always going to get two binomials when we factor in trinomials. And then two numbers that multiply to equal positive 72 and add to equal negative 17. Negative 9 times negative 8 equals positive 72. And if you owe somebody 9 and you owe somebody 8, you owe 17. So that'll be our final answer. Now it doesn't matter what order you have these in. As long as you have a W minus 9 in your answer and a W minus 8 in your answer. So this is my final answer, but it could be this. It's the same thing. Minus 7 times minus 7 equals 49. Minus 7 plus minus 7 equals negative 14. So my answer is x minus 7 times x minus 7. Y minus 8 times y minus 8. Now, for this problem, they asked us to find a binomial that when squared equals the given, okay? Whenever they give you directions like that, understand, all they want you to do is find out one of the factors. They're telling you that one of the factors is a binomial. It has two pieces to it. This has two pieces, this has two pieces, okay? They just want to know one of the binomials. A binomial has two terms in it. This is the answer. This is a binomial that when I multiply it by itself, I get this. Y minus 8 times y minus 8 is this. So this is the binomial that they're looking for. This is the answer to the question that they asked you. It's very important that you answer the question that they asked you. Yes, this is how you factor this problem. They didn't ask you to factor it. They asked you to find the binomial. So this is the answer. So be careful. Make sure you read the directions. Now, the difference between this one and the other one is the first coefficient is 1 for number 17. The first coefficient is 1 for number 16. The first coefficient is 1 for number 15. Okay, so you could just find two numbers and multiply to equal this and equal this. But for this problem, the first coefficient is 5. That's when we have to factor by using arc it, stick it. Arc it means you multiply 5 times negative 16, and then it goes away for a little while. So 5 times negative 16 is negative 8. Now you factor this just like you did 17, 16, and some of the others. Two numbers that multiply to equal negative 80 and add to equal 2. Those numbers are 10 and negative 8. Okay? Now, the only difference, an additional difference between these and the other ones is, once I took that 5 and multiplied it by the negative 16, it went away. but it only goes away for a little while. You must stick it after you factor underneath both regular numbers. 10 is the regular number, so we're going to stick this 5 underneath this 10. 8, negative 8 is the regular number, we're going to stick this 5 under here. Now, if you can divide this into this, you do it. 5 goes into 10 2 times, so we just have x plus 2 here. Okay? Now, 5 doesn't go into 8 evenly. That means that it's going to make a decimal. So if you divide them and it makes a decimal, just take the 5 and put it in the front. This is 5x minus 8 times x plus 2. Okay, all of your teachers taught you this method, so you just get your notes, go step by step, you'll get the hang of it. Arc it, stick it, because that says 6 first. If it's 1, do it the regular way. If it's more than 1, you arc it, stick it. 6 times negative 6 is negative 36. So that's where we got this from. The 6 goes away for a little while. Factor this. 2 numbers that multiply equal negative 36 and add to equal negative 5 or negative 9 and positive 4. Now I go stick my 6 that I arced underneath the regular numbers. Now for this one, 6 doesn't go into 9, 6 doesn't go into 4. But you always reduce all fractions regardless of the situation. We learned that in middle school and in little school. You always reduce all fractions. So I know that 3 goes into both of these. 3 goes into 9 3 times, 3 goes into 6 2 times. So that's why we made this 3 over 2. 2 goes into 4 2 times, and 2 goes into 6 3 times. Now, if you can't divide it evenly, you just put it in the front. So this 2 goes up front, so this should be 2m minus 3. And then this 3 goes up front. This should be 3m plus 2. So our final answer, 2m minus 3, 3m plus 2. If you multiply this out, you get the original problem. Okay? Since that's the 14, you do arc it, stick it. But before we do arc it, stick it, if you can ever make the problem smaller that you're working with, you do that so it kind of makes the numbers smaller that you're dealing with. I know there's a common factor in all these. I can pull that out before I do my arc and stick it, and it'll make my problem a little easier for me to deal with. So I know that 7 goes into 14 2 times, 7 goes into 7 1 time, and then 7 goes into negative 7 negative 1 time. Now I do arc it, stick it. 2 times negative 1 is negative 2. Factor this, you get y plus 2 times y minus 1. And then this 2 that I arced here, you stick it back under the regular numbers. 2 goes into 2 1 time, and then 2 doesn't go into 1 evenly, so you put it in the front. Okay? Remember, my 7 that I pulled out in the beginning stays with me all the way to the end. Do not forget, if you pull out the greatest common factor, it should still be there. It does not go away just because you pulled it out and then you're just dealing with the middle proportion. In your final answer, this won't multiply to be this unless you multiply this first and then multiply all your answers by 7. Then you get this original problem. Okay. Now this is a special case. This doesn't have 3 terms. It's not a trinomial. It doesn't have 4 terms, so you don't solve it by grouping. This is a special case. This is called a difference of squares. We are subtracting 2 perfect squares. So whenever we're subtracting 2 perfect squares, our answer is going to be the square root of this, which is r, plus the square root of this, which is 8, times the square root of this, which is r, minus the square root of this, which is 8. Every time it's going to be like that, okay? So if I had r squared minus 16, our answer would be r minus 4 times r plus 4. If I had r squared minus 100, that's a difference. Difference means subtract 2 perfect squares. My answer is going to be r plus 10 times r minus 10. These are very easy to recognize. These are a lot smaller than all the other problems that you're going to do on the test. And it's going to be a minus sign in between 2 perfect squares. When you see that, the light goes off. I know what to do. R minus the square root of this and r plus the square root of this. Every time. Okay? Real easy to recognize. So, is 16 a perfect square? Yeah. 4 times 4 is 16. All even exponents are perfect squares. All of them. X squared is a perfect square. X to the million is a perfect square. X to the 555,652 is a perfect square because it's an even number. X squared is a perfect square. 36 is a perfect square because 6 times 6 is 36. So the answer is the square root of 16x squared, which is 4x, minus the square root of this, which is 6, and then 4x plus 6. Final answer. Now, I can make this smaller. Before I arc and stick it, 6 goes into all of these. So I pull out a 6. Then I do my arc. Then I don't even have to do arc and stick it because this is 1 now. So I just find two numbers that multiply to equal -8 and add to equal -2. That's minus 4 and plus 2. Okay? You multiply this out if you want to know if it's right. Okay? For all of these problems, you can pretty much find out if your answer is correct. You might not be able to get the correct answer, but you can definitely find out if your answer is right or not. Multiply this out using FOIL or box. Multiply all your answers you get by 6, and you should get this. If your answer is correct. Again, difference of perfect squares. 3t minus 9, and then 3t plus 9. Okay, all of those are perfect squares. 9, that's even, so that's a perfect square. 81 is a perfect square. Okay. Now, do these have common factors? Is there a number that goes into 15, 16, and 4? No. So now you have to do, make sure real quick, hold on. 4, and then 4, and then 15. Okay. So we're going to do arc and stick it because you can't pull out a common factor. 4 times 15 is 60. So we get x squared plus 16 plus 60. Now remember, we got to stick this 4 after we factor. So we factor this, and this is x plus 10 times x plus 6. 10 times 6 is 60. 10 plus 6 is 16. And I got to stick this 4 that I arced earlier, stick it under my regular numbers. I reduce, I get this, and now since 2 doesn't go into 5, I put it in the front. 2x plus 5 times 2x plus 3. If I want to check it, multiply it, I get this, if I'm correct. Okay? That's the end of our study guide review. Hopefully this helps. Talk to you next time.